welcome back to the Down to the Wire podcast. The Premier League is less than a week away. We're going to be doing a season preview. Tonight, we're going to dissect who we think is going to finish in the top four, who we think is going to be relegated, do we think there are going to be any dark horses, etc., etc. Jack, how are you doing?
You know what? I'm pretty good. I wasn't too invested in the Olympics, and then I gradually got into it a bit more when the track cycling came along, and that was a thrilling watch. The Lions was a bit disappointing, but I wasn't too invested. Yeah. So, but you know, it was disappointing as always.
Missed opportunity for the Lions, I think, to be honest.
Yeah.
Very much a missed opportunity. I feel like South Africa were there. South Africa were good, but I feel like they were there for the taking, you know?
Well, Warren Gatland's won many Six Nations with Wales just by playing the type of rugby where you just kick for 3 points all the time. And I was just surprised they started being ambitious and going for tries all the time. But hey-ho, it is what it is.
Hindsight, eh? Hindsight. And as this is a football podcast, we have got Dav with us once again. How are you doing, Dav?
Yeah, doing well, thanks, Jack. It's there's been a good summer of sport, actually, hasn't it? It's hard to believe we've just gone from one thing to the next, and the moment when the big one finishes with the Olympics, we're back round to the start of the new season. So it's coming thick and fast, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the thing is as well, when you think about it, I mean, like when I say last season, not the season just gone, the season before where we had the big break for COVID, obviously we kind of went from one season to the next with a short gap, because obviously it was a big gap in the middle. Then the season just gone, we've gone from that to Euros, and then next season, isn't there like...
There'll be a summer break.
Isn't the World Cup in the winter?
Yeah, so we'll have the summer break at least, but yeah, World Cup in the winter. There's also AFCON in the middle of this year's season. So.
Well, that's a point as well. I might put that in the notes.
Yeah, that'll...
for Liverpool.
That'll impact Liverpool, but...
I'm just going to add that in right now. Anyway, should we crack on?
Let's do so.
Let's do it.
Cool, good stuff. I mean, one of the big things... so Friday 13th, bit of a weird date to be starting the league on, I guess. But 13th of August is when, gosh, I didn't realise it was on Friday. Yeah. I say less than a week away. We're like a couple of days away. 4 days, man. I mean, one of the big things is we've got crowds back.
Yes.
Who would have thought that we'd be celebrating the fact that we can just have crowds again?
Mm. I do think it's going to play a big role this year. I mean, I quite like my fantasy football, and there was a dramatic spike for teams that played at home in the end of last season for their one game in terms of their performances. So I think, I mean, the benefit of being at home, I think, gradually dissipated before COVID, before the world changed. But I think now that crowds are returning, I think there's going to be a big factor. I think you're going to see a lot more attacking from home teams and a lot more defending from away teams, just because they're going to be like, whoa, there's a lot more atmosphere here now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole home and away dynamic, just in general, it'll be more of a factor, won't it? Just because naturally that's part of football, and for the last, year and a half, 2 years, we've kind of... apart from the Euros, obviously in the Premier League at least, we've lost that kind of dynamic, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a big factor, I think, going into the new season. Very much looking forward to having crowds back again.
I tell you what, that could quite badly impact City, because obviously they don't have any fans. So when they go to all these away grounds, they're going to be
negligible.
Like, what's going on here? We're not used to this. And when they're at home, they're not going to see much of a home advantage anyway. So who knows? They could drop a lot of points this year because of not having any fans.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's weird as well. Like, as a Liverpool fan, I've been watching and following some of the pre-season games, and I think it was Jota who scored the other day, and the game was at Anfield, and like the fans went mental. And I was like, why are they going so bonkers? And I was like, oh, hang on, that's the first goal that fans in the stadium probably would have seen Jota score, because he was, he was injured. He was injured for a significant chunk towards the end of the season. So when some fans were allowed back in, I don't think he was really in and around the first team. And then obviously before that, it was all behind closed doors anyway. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what sort of impact that has, not only on teams, but like if there were, specific players where that kind of benefits them.
Absolutely.
Perhaps having or hinders them, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Speaking of players, there have been a lot of big name signings across multiple teams. There've also been a lot of rumours as well.
I tell you what, we're seeing the impact of COVID here. All of these minor leagues, non-Premier League leagues haven't, because they haven't got the TV revenue to the same degree. If they depend a little bit more on revenue from tickets and all that. So now they haven't had that. We're seeing Barcelona not being able to sign Messi. You're not going to see Real Madrid and Atletico signing very many. The Italian teams seem to be wanting to sell quite often. I mean, Juve have made no secret that they're trying to get rid of Ronaldo because he's too expensive, and Inter Milan, despite winning the league, have pretty much sold everybody under the sun that they have, and even the German leagues to some degree are selling their players. So I think we're seeing the Premier League steal all the good talent that's out there at the moment.
I do think there are a couple of factors in there, though, just going off from that briefly. I mean, firstly, the Inter Milan scenario is in Conte's no longer with them, which I think was a big factor, and they basically said that he was going to have to sell some players, which I guess arguably could be because of COVID, but I think in any scenario, regardless of COVID, if you're telling a manager he's got to sell key players, that's never a good scenario, is it? I feel like Barcelona have made their own coffin and very much hammered the nails in themselves by it's years of overspending on, like I saw something the other day, like Coutinho was earning like €470,000 a week. Like the guy didn't even play for them 2 seasons ago. Like it's crazy. So
especially when you think
I do agree though. Especially as in like sorry, go on.
When you think of other sports like the NFL, there's a salary cap and players willingly take less money to sign for big teams. Surely big teams like Barca and Real Madrid don't have to pay lucrative amounts of money to sign these guys. Surely they're just willing to be there because they know they're going to win some stuff. So I am amazed that they have to shell out so much money in wages. I know obviously you've got the best players and the best players deserve to be paid a lot of money, but surely there's got to be a bit of leeway in a sense, and the players go, well, we're willing to take a little bit of a pay cut because we're playing for the best team in the world. But it just shocks me that they haven't cottoned on to the fact that by being a big team they haven't automatically got to pay big fees. They can sort of get, especially when you think like lower teams, they surely should be the ones paying more because players are less willing to play for them. But
I mean, I think the problem is that ultimately football is a player's market, isn't it? As in, it's not about, as in, for example, think of the Wijnaldum scenario, as in he can go to Barcelona or PSG. He doesn't really mind, I guess, which one he goes to, and then it has just become a bidding battle, really, doesn't it, between the two teams, who's willing to offer the most. But anyway, we digress. So there's a lot of big name signings. Not a lot of change in terms of management. I think the only really big one in the Premier League is probably Spurs, isn't it? They've got
they've taken
got Santo in from Wolves.
And Wolves have got some guy from Benfica.
Yeah. Apart from that, have there been any other sort of
not so much
changes?
Not so much merry-go-round, but you got Rafa at Everton. You got Vieira at Palace.
Okay.
It's a good show. I mean, it's a good show.
How many of them will be in a job after 10 weeks, I don't know. But, Interesting that we've had so few changes. Well, it's particularly at the top teams, you know what I mean? For years you've seen teams like United discard managers after 3 seasons. Surprised Pep stuck around for more than 3 seasons at City. Chelsea.
That's because he hasn't won the Champions League, isn't it?
Yeah, to be fair, he didn't win it at Bayern and he left after 3 years.
True.
But it's just nothing changing at the top really, which is quite nice to see because it's just nice to see managers get a good stab at it in a sense, rather than, I mean, guys like Vieira, if they don't get results early, they're the ones trying to change the face of a club and make them more attacking. If they don't get off the start in blocks quick, they could be quickly out of a job, which is a shame. But
true.
It's the brutal nature.
Cynically, you could just say that because of COVID, it's expensive to sack people, isn't it?
Yeah, which is maybe one of the good aspects to come out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, you want to get your money's worth, I guess, rather than just paying. Who was it that was like
David Moyes?
I think it was Conte. Like for years, he was just like having money paid to him from Chelsea, just where they'd sacked him.
Yeah, David Moyes only stopped getting his payments last season, I think.
What, from United?
Yeah, it was like a 6-year contract.
Wow.
Who signs someone to a 6-year contract if you're willing to sack them within one? Baffles.
Manchester United.
Yeah.
That's good work, isn't it, from David?
Yeah, that's he's done well then. He's done well. Speaking of the top teams then, what are our thoughts on City heading into the new season?
They're the team to beat, surely. I mean, obviously they won the league, so that makes them the team to beat, but they look to have only gotten stronger. But I think that does depend on if they sign Kane or not. Obviously, it's a phenomenal team, but you lose Aguero, but was he really playing last season? And is the likes of Ferran Torres and Gabriel Jesus good enough to replace him? Potentially not, but yeah, they got Grealish. I don't know if they really needed him, but I think I'm not going to say their season will be defined on if they get Kane, but if they get Kane, they win the league, I think. If they don't get Kane,
it's up for debate.
It's up for debate, but I still think they're the close to favourites, close to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit surprised that they went for Grealish over Kane, just because I know that, Raheem Sterling wasn't exactly on fire last season, and they what's his name, Sané went to Bayern Munich in the transfer, so he's gone, and they didn't really replace him. They've got a lot of players who play in that sort
Foden,
of
Bernardo,
attacking
Silva,
midfield.
Mahrez.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of players who play in that position. Whereas for me, like, with the greatest respect to Ferran Torres, fairly unproven. As in he's had a couple of good games.
Looked good for Spain.
But is it? He was good for Spain, but as in, is he experienced enough and good enough that you'd basically say, right, this is my number 9?
Probably not.
I think that's up for debate, and I'm not convinced by Gabriel Jesus, to be honest. I think if you put Gabriel Jesus in the majority of the Premier League teams, I feel like he probably just goes missing.
Like a Richarlison.
I would say I would rather have Richarlison than Gabriel Jesus, to be honest. I feel like Gabriel Jesus is very much a...
Benteke.
He's good, but as in... He's a what?
A Benteke.
Okay, alright, let's not go too far. As in, I think he's just one of those players that he's in a very good side, isn't he? But then, I wouldn't have him as like a number 9 anyway. He's almost like a centre-forward for me, Gabriel Jesus. So, yeah, I mean... I guess based on what happened last season, you'd have them as potential favourites. I think. What are your thoughts, Dav, on City?
Yeah, it's hard to see past them, isn't it? Just because of their depth. I think that's the key thing. We saw that last season. We might come on to it later, but I think when you look at a lot of the top teams this season, as a starting 11, I think you could make a good case for any of them. There's not a lot to choose between a full strength starting 11 from United and Chelsea and Liverpool, but the difference is the strength in depth, being able to play on the weekend and midweek, every week, most weeks of the season. That was the difference last season, and I think that's probably why they've gone for Grealish, because chances are there might be one or two City players that are thinking, even though it sounds a bit ridiculous, like, because you're winning stuff all the time at City, maybe there are players that want to, they want to be the linchpin of a side. Maybe they feel they want to be more of a star player. Like, you're always going to be behind De Bruyne in a team like City, aren't you, in that midfield? So if one or two players have maybe suggested they're going, something we don't, Grealish coming in there, he's going to jump at that chance, isn't he, to play Champions League? So I think it's very hard to see past City, and so much so with Kane. I would say if they sign Kane, not only does that put them in with a chance of winning the league, but I think that's the difference for them, because every year they threaten a quadruple until like March, April, don't they? And then they lose in a semi of one of the FA Cup or something like that.
Usually
like
the same
drops
week.
off a little bit.
And I wonder if signing Kane actually gives them a realistic chance at getting a quadruple, because their squad is just that good.
To be fair,
if you add 25 goals from Kane into that, like, I don't see how you stop, because last season Aguero barely played. I think Ilkay Gundogan was their top scorer with 13, but like everybody scored about 10 goals of their forwards and midfielders, you know, like, so the goals were spread. So you add Torres in there, you add Kane into that with the likes of Torres and Mahrez.
Yeah,
it's a scary proposition for a lot of other teams, I think, to be keeping up with that. Like,
to be fair, I think if anyone's going to be able to challenge PSG with Messi, I think City can only be the only team, and they'd need Harry Kane, I think, to do that. I just think I don't know how you stop that PSG team if they get Messi if you don't have Harry Kane and that's in your team. But yeah, that's just on the quadruple talk.
fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think I still think they need to sign an out-and-out striker, to be honest. As in...
Well, you think it doesn't have to be Kane? Just need anybody?
Well, I mean, the question you'd probably have is, if it's not Kane, who would it be? And I think, you know, Lukaku seems to be pretty much on his way to Chelsea, and he'd probably be next on the cards. Then after that, I'm not really sure who you'd be down to be honest.
Haaland.
Haaland,
yeah. Probably Haaland, but then having just spent 100 million on Jack Grealish, at that point I think you're probably talking about 200 million for Haaland, aren't you?
Yeah, I think Haaland garners a bigger value than Kane, just purely on his age.
Yes.
You know you're going to get
he probably
an
does.
extra 7 years.
That's true, but as in, I think... Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the thing that I find a little bit strange, as in, you'd assume that if they've now signed Grealish for 100 million, you'd assume that Kane would be in the same region just because of how good he is. I'm not sure City are going to spend 200 million in one window. I just can't see them doing it. I really can't.
Yeah,
But yeah,
financially struggling, aren't they?
No, they're not financially struggling, but you know, I'd be very surprised if they went and got. And I don't know. I fancy with the Kane rumours, they peaked sort of when he didn't return to training, and perhaps I haven't particularly followed it, I guess, but as in, they kind of peaked when he didn't return to training, and since then we haven't really heard anything, have we? So I'm wondering perhaps if it's going to be one of those ones that just drops under the radar and he just ends up staying at Spurs for the moment. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one. Yes, we will have to wait and see.
Speaking of squad depth, a team that perhaps doesn't have the greatest squad depth, but has perhaps just made two signings that can rival the big sort of teams in terms of quality. Do you think United are now contenders with the signings of Varane and Sancho? Because they were second last year, and if City hadn't gone on that streak where they won, what was it, something like 20 straight, United, you know, wouldn't have been far off of them. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, there's no doubt that Varane is a better option than Lindelof as centre-half, is there?
Yeah.
And equally, you know, as in, I feel like Jadon Sancho is a different class to like Martial, for example. But I don't know. The thing I find weird a bit, I can't work out with United, is that I get what you're saying about City going on that massive streak, but let's not forget that United did draw a lot of games where you were kind of like, if they went for the jugular, as in, like, for example...
Well, that's the thing. If you turn those draws into wins with these two signings...
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it was a case that they didn't have the personnel. I think it was just a tactical thing.
Okay.
They just seemed to go into those games either thinking, right, we're just going to come away with a draw, or just not being able to. For example, United versus Liverpool in January, Liverpool were really struggling. For me, if I were a United fan, I'd be thinking, right, we want to go and finish Liverpool off here. We want to be winning. Whereas United just came and were just like happy with a draw, which I thought was a bit odd.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Tactically, you question why did Solskjaer set up?
I mean, it's easy to say that in hindsight.
But to be honest, as a United fan, I wasn't against it. I think you can let teams get away from you by letting them beat you, and if you don't let them beat you, you know, in a sense, you force them to equal your results against other teams, and it's where you drop. I feel like you lose leagues where you drop points rather than where you pick them up. And if you're not dropping points to the big ones and you're not dropping them to the small ones, you can win the league. But it's the dropping of points to the smaller teams. I think United's. To be fair, it's been United's issue for a while. But yeah, that's just my thoughts.
I mean, I don't know about you, Dav, but as in, I think I agree with what you're saying, Jack. But I think there's a part of me that thinks the mindset of just get a draw against the top teams. I feel like that doesn't work particularly well anymore. Like when you look at how City, like the points totals that City had last season, Liverpool had the season before. City, and Liverpool, as in Liverpool had the highest points total without winning the league, you know, and that's first and second. So I feel like nowadays you're kind of really, if you go in for the league, you're almost aiming for that 100 point boundary. What do you think on that sort of scenario, Dav? Am I being a bit unrealistic?
Possibly a little. I mean, I no one is going to go away to City and be disappointed with a point, are they? So,
oh no.
I think, from what I remember of last season, I think United's problem was they'd lose to Sheffield United at home and City down with them 5-0. Like, those are the games where I think you'd question, if you're a United fan, those are the games where you question Solskjaer more. Like, you know, Sheffield United turning up at home, they've won 2 games all season, and we lose 2-1. Like, what does that say about the mindset? Whereas you know that City are going to go out there and like not let them touch the ball and beat them quite comfortably. Whether that's 2-0 or 3-0, they were never in doubt. So I think it depends on the game and on the circumstances. Like, the more you get towards the end of the season, the more significant the games are. But certainly, it's one of the, like they say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So in the first half of the season, especially, maybe you'd feel more pressure if you were at home. Like if you set up to draw 0-0 against Liverpool at Old Trafford, you'd have the fans on your back. Whereas last season, you didn't have opportunity to have the fans on your back, and so I think there's a lot of that which might change a little bit this year. But I think, to be fair to United, they've done some good business, haven't they? They've seen the weaknesses in their team. Varane is a great piece of business, actually. When you look at how much they've paid for him, you look at the experience he's got. He's won a World Cup. He's won a good few Champions
Leagues.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's a good player, and if him and Maguire can form a good understanding and relationship, I have to see how quickly he can settle. But I think on paper, like United have got a good starting 11. I think it is depth that would be the difference for them, and it's keeping everyone fit. But you'd imagine that Sancho would take an element of the pressure off Fernandes. Like he scored so many and assisted so many last season. You wonder whether that will share that out. And I think that the big key for United actually is, can they somehow get back the Paul Pogba who plays for France? Because if they can do that, then they are dangerous. Like I think that makes all the difference. If Pogba can't be bothered, which is how it looks sometimes, even if that's harsh, like he's a bit of a weakness in the team. Strangely, even though on paper he's one of the most skillful players in their team. I think it's all on that really. So ultimately they've made some good signings, but they're probably still one or two short of the depth that you would need to play against City over the course of a season. Because I think that's why Solskjaer last season made those choices. He knew his squad wasn't deep enough, and it was better for him to not to lose. Which you could either say that's clever or that's a bit uninspiring. But you got to deal with what's in front of you at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I guess I was perhaps looking at it purely from that Liverpool fixture, and I guess.
To be honest, I agree.
I'm speaking.
I do agree that they probably should have gone for the jugular then, but
yes, I guess when I'm saying that, I think it's because I knew how poorly Liverpool had been playing. As a Liverpool fan, I was going into that game thinking, if we get a draw, I'm happy, and if that's how I'm feeling as a Liverpool fan, surely as a United fan, you'd be wanting 3 points at the very least. But I can see what you're saying in that ultimately, if you win all your games against the lower sides and you get draws against the top teams, you are effectively putting the onus on
they have
the team above you to match.
Exactly.
Match or improve. But yeah, I guess we'll see how United go. To be honest, we'll see how they go. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think this is probably something you could level at a lot of the top sides in the Premier League at the moment. As in, apart from City, like the majority of them seem to have good 11s, like very good 11s, but then after that they're struggling a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see the impact of that over the course of the season.
What do you make of sort of a Chelsea then? Because they haven't quite got the... I'd probably say of United, Liverpool, Chelsea and City, I'd probably say that they've got the worst starting 11 of the four, but they've probably got the second best depth. Would you say that?
I mean, I think if they sign Lukaku, I think they've got a brilliant attack.
Yeah.
I mean, any team that can boast Lukaku, Ziyech, Pulisic, Kai Havertz, and Mason Mount. Mason Mount is probably the best of all of them, to be honest. In my opinion, well, maybe, yeah, I would say he probably is the best of all of them. In all honesty, I think the question mark I would have over Chelsea is probably at centre half. I think
you don't rate Thiago Silva, do you?
I do rate Thiago Silva. However, he is the wrong side of 30, and I feel like if you partner Thiago Silva with a dynamic centre half, I think you're sorted. However, and I think this was shown at the Euros, I feel like Rudiger is not quite good enough for me. I don't think. But yeah, perhaps that's a little bit unfair. Perhaps, as I'm not a Chelsea fan, perhaps Chelsea fans would argue otherwise.
I think that's why they play with a 3, though, isn't it? Like,
yeah, that's true.
Christensen as well to back them up.
They have Azpilicueta playing on the left of it, don't they? Or the right of it, whichever way around it is. Like between the three, that back 3, and they were solid, weren't they? Last season.
That's true.
Like they obviously had a way of making it work. And that's what it's about at the end of the day. And sometimes we can say on paper, but as we all know, games are played on paper, and sometimes it's the partnerships and the understanding and the way that they've been drilled. You don't necessarily have to have the best 4 or 5 defenders on paper, but as a unit, Chelsea obviously found a way to make it work, and they had Reece James, Ben Chilwell. Yeah, I mean you even had Emerson playing in the final of the Euros, and he's barely getting a game for his club.
Yeah, that's true.
Is this the season that Ethan Ampadu gets to play centre back for Chelsea?
Who knows?
That's the question.
Who knows? I mean, the thing with Chelsea is, I guess clearly they're a very good side. As in, they've gone on to win the Champions League. However, do we feel that over the course of a whole season, do you think they're good enough to compete for the title? I mean, I get the context. It's not the same level, but as in Roberto Di Matteo won the Champions League with Chelsea, and then the following season he was gone in the group stages. So is there? I mean, I guess another thing is as well. Do you think Chelsea will perhaps maybe not suffer? That's not the right word, but they've got a new manager in. Generally, when a new manager comes in, they get that teams get that initial bounce.
Well, it was initial, but he carried it. He carried it for the whole.
In the league, though.
To be fair, they weren't. Well, I think they were close to the top four on it. I know they ended up finishing behind Liverpool in the end, but they were, I'm not going to say resting players, but I think the focus was on FA Cup final and Champions League final. So I'd be surprised if the focus had dropped from the league a touch. But, I mean, going back to what you're saying about United and the fact that they were quite abject when it came to the big teams. I mean, Chelsea, Tuchel rather, managed to beat Pep Guardiola 3 times last season. Out of 3. So it's like, well, do you not think that's the sort of... If you don't think United can win the league for that reason, do you think that perhaps Chelsea could because they can beat the big teams?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is that one of those 3 times it was completely Pep Guardiola's own doing that they lost.
Which one?
Is the Champions League final. 100%. I don't know what... Well, as in, like... With the, don't get me wrong, Chelsea played the game very well, and ultimately you can only play what's in front of you. However, I don't understand why Pep Guardiola, when he's got Aguero on his bench, I appreciate that Aguero hadn't played a lot, but why would you play your most creative midfielder as a false 9? That baffles me, and it's standard Pep Guardiola. He always, when it comes to the Champions League, he always tries to be too clever. Last season, he tried to rest players against Lyon for the final and got knocked out. There've been I remember one time against Liverpool, he played Gundogan as a winger. So for me, that Champions League final result that's all on Pep Guardiola for me. And I think it was like, wasn't it something like only the second time all season that they hadn't played with either, well, at least one of Rodri and or Fernandinho.
Yeah, that is
so for me, that one, I think, as good as Chelsea were, and like they were good because they played it well. They just played on the counter, didn't they? They basically just said, "Look, City are going to have the ball. That's what they want to do. We're going to be smart on the counter," and they were. But equally, it wasn't like they were just camped on in their box. Every time they got the ball, they did play it around as well. So they were good. However, I feel like City shot themselves in the foot a little bit. And it's one of those things, I guess, isn't it? I don't know whether 2 games against City were they both in the league, or was one of them in the cup?
One was FA Cup semi, the other was the league.
Yeah,
but okay. 1 or 3. Sorry, quick fire question. Maybe I put this to Dav. Do you think the signing of Lukaku for Chelsea do you think Lukaku signing for Chelsea will have a bigger impact than Kane signing for City?
Because of what it would do for the team, yes. Because, like, Kane is like a kind of icing on the cake type.
Yeah.
Or even a cherry on top of the icing on the cake at City. Like, they got a lot there. Whereas I feel with Chelsea, like, Lukaku is a significant piece. Like, I feel like Lukaku improves Chelsea more than Kane improves City. That's not saying that Kane is... I think Kane's a better player than Lukaku, but City are already good, and so they're not being improved as much because they're already a very good team. Whereas I think last season, like, poor Timo Werner, he could only score if he was offside. So, like, they need someone who can put those goals away, and I think, like, Lukaku can do that. He's done that with Inter Milan. He had a decent Euros as well. I think that that signing makes Chelsea a kind of dark horse pick, really, because between that piece of the jigsaw, then if you're going to do that and you're going to be bringing someone like Werner or Havertz off the bench with pace, that then, tired centre-backs don't want that coming at them. And Thomas Tuchel obviously was able to really put his stamp on the team quickly, get them playing his way. If that continues this season, then they're not going to be an easy team to beat. I think they're going to be right in amongst it.
Yeah, and I mean, sorry, just going back to the Champions League final, I was saying how Pep Guardiola, cost City. I think I'm right in saying that Werner had some pretty big chances in that Champions League final, and it could have been over fairly early on. Whereas if you have Lukaku in that situation, he's probably burying those. So, I think you'd be very much a fool to write Chelsea off completely for the league, absolutely. I'm going to raise this as a devil's advocate question here, because I guess it's the opposite. Well, not the opposite. It's another angle on Lukaku, I guess, as in when Lukaku was at United, he wasn't. I know it's been a little while. He's obviously been very good for Inter Milan this season, particularly. He wasn't exactly vintage, as in like you and just kind of simple things, I guess, as well, like just first touch, which you'd assume for a professional footballer. I'm not saying he's having to like nutmeg people with his first touch from a 50-yard punt from the goalkeeper, but as in it was embarrassing at points, I guess, when he was at United. Do you think that's do you think that'll be a concern for Chelsea, or do you think that is recent form in Serie A and with Inter Milan will have put those sort of questions to bed?
Truth be told, I don't think his touch was bad. His touch was bad when he was at United. I don't think anyone's doubting that. Mm-hmm. But he still was a close to 20 goal a season player, and he's playing in an Italian league which is much improved from what it was. You know what I mean? In terms of before, it was just Juve, and I know Juve took a touch step back, but by and large, teams like Inter, AC, Atalanta, Lazio have always been there or thereabouts. Napoli. There's much more quality in the league now, and the fact that he's gone over there and basically just waltzed the league, and I think he's a more refined player, but far more lethal. I mean, you saw him in the Euros. The man was deadly. He wasn't one of those players who'd run at the keeper and try and beat them. He got the ball. If he saw the keeper, he went, I'm just going to beat you from here, mate, because I can. And he is just absolutely lethal. And that's the thing with Chelsea. They don't really... Well, they do play some form of counter-attacking if they're playing against really hard teams like City. But by and large, just give Lukaku opportunities and he's going to bury them. He doesn't have to take loads of touches and go round. Just give it to him on a plate, as they've been doing for Werner, and hopefully he can actually put them in the net. That's my opinion anyway.
Fair enough. I mean, do you think there's the potential that a big price tag could weigh him down a little bit? I mean, I think that was possibly part of the reason for the criticism at United was in... I get what you're saying, is in, no, he's a 20-goal-a-season striker. I mean, for £75 million, which at the time was, is in... we're talking a good few years ago now, is in that's probably the equivalent of, I reckon, probably about £120 million now. As in...
Yeah, that's the thing. But
you expect more.
How much is it now
for
this time?
that sort of fee? I think it's around 100 million, isn't it?
97 and a half.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
And that, I know it's obviously crazy money. But
of course it is. But in the context of football.
Yeah, I mean, people are signing Neymar for 220. I take Lukaku for 97. I just think that's the way football is. It's not that the money has increased, but the clubs, in a sense, whereas before they could keep a lot of money and sort of the max value of a player, you think 10 years ago it was probably about 30 mil or something, and it was like, whoa, they've gone over to 32 for Berbatov. What's going on? In a sense, I think back then they could have gone to the 50s and 60s anyway. So.
They just didn't,
yeah. I think obviously the price tag weighs on a player, but by and large, I don't think for Chelsea it's not a gamble to the extent as what it would look like in the context of a normal business decision. I think they know it's going to be safe.
He had a similar price tag going to Inter Milan, though, didn't he? Like they bought him for a similar amount of money. And at the end of the day, you've got to look at it like this: Chelsea have sold Giroud and bought in Lukaku, so they're better.
Yeah, it's not a bad bit of business.
Well, I don't know. I think that's a step backwards.
Not a bad bit of business at all.
Big Giroud fan.
Shut up.
To be honest, I think Chelsea would be a better team right now if they'd have sold Werner than Giroud.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue that, to be honest. But I mean, I guess for them to sell Werner, that's very much admitting that they've made a mistake, and they would make a huge loss on him if
They've done that before.
They sold him now. I think.
Think of Shevchenko. They signed him, sold him, signed him, sold him across 4 seasons.
Yeah, I guess.
Anyway, let's move on because we've spoken about Chelsea.
Just a little fact for you for Lukaku. He is, in terms of accumulated fee, he is the most expensive football player in history.
Seriously?
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought you'd like that one.
Was it Ibrahimovic before?
No.
You sure?
I doubt it, because, let's be fair, Lukaku went from Chelsea to Everton for 30 mil.
Yeah.
Then from Everton to United for 75. From United to Inter for some crazy amount, and now he's going from Inter to Chelsea for 100 million. It's 200 and... It's something crazy. Because I read the statistic, they said the second player in terms of accumulated transfer fee is Neymar.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. There's probably just one transfer, does that?
Well, it's 2 in it, because I think it was it was 60 odd million when he signed from Santos, and then obviously 200 million when he went to Paris. But yeah, thought you'd like that one. Anyway, moving on from Chelsea, because we had a big old stint on Chelsea there. Clearly we all had a lot to say on them. Liverpool, I guess. Can they pick up where they left off 2 years ago?
Truth be told,
having won the league,
I don't think they can. They've got the good enough squad too. They haven't got the depth, and I think it's already shown by the fact that Robertson's in a boot as of today.
Well, hang on a second now. Let's just get this in context. Firstly, he's got a boot on.
Yeah.
Have you seen the picture of him in the boot?
Yeah, it's quite a big boot. It goes up almost to his knee.
It is a big boot, but bearing in mind it's on his right foot.
Yeah.
He's got a crutch in his left hand. He hasn't got a crutch in his right hand, so that's 100% precautionary.
Okay, but still, he's in a boot. I'd much rather see him in a set of Vans.
Tsimikas has been really good in pre-season. Just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
However, what I will say is I feel like I don't really understand why they haven't tried to sign a midfielder to replace Wijnaldum.
100%.
As in, that seems a little bit confusing to me. As in, you'd assume that our starting midfield, now that Wijnaldum's gone, is probably going to be Fabinho, Henderson and Thiago.
Well, what I don't understand is when City had that, I think it was 2 years ago, had that season where they pretty much had no defenders. They were all getting injured and they really struggled. They went out the next window and pretty much bought every good defender under the sun which they could get their hands on. And Liverpool, I know, how are they so cash strapped that they can't sign players? They are probably top 1 or 2 club in England, with United, in terms of they must be getting so much money from, you think of the kit deal they did with Nike now. You think of obviously they haven't got the ticket revenue, but for a club of that size, where's the money? And why haven't they invested? I mean, the fact that they let Wijnaldum go, travesty. So instantly you should replace him, but not just replace him. Get another or 2 quality players to back them up. Get another 1 or 2 defenders to back them up, and get somebody up top to spice it up a little bit. It's stagnated a touch from where they were 2 years ago now, or 1 year ago rather, to where they are now. It's like this is the same squad, and I mean you see the United teams of old where under Fergie constantly changing. Just get the best players in, get new guys in behind. Do you know what I mean? It's just when you think of that 1999 squad, they had about 5 strikers. You think of the team with Tevez, Berbatov, Rooney, Ronaldo, Hernandez for a stage. It was like you just got to constantly be adding to the squad. You can't settle. And I think that's Liverpool, fantastic first team. But I think the depth. It's not just depth though. It's the fact that they've not got quality to challenge. I'm not saying Martial's great for United, but I prefer. Well, he can go on purple patches at the very least. I know some would say he's not great, but Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I feel like comparing Martial to any of Liverpool's attack is
that's
almost
not.
It's almost morally corrupt,
Yeah.
to be honest.
I'm-
Like that's just hideous.
I'm comparing Martial to the likes of whoever's behind Jota, because I don't know who's behind Jota. Well, that's Origi, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, at that point, you'd probably be down to Origi or Shaqiri, I'd imagine. Which, in fairness, I couldn't argue with you on that one.
But for a team that plays with three attackers, to only have 4 good attackers is baffling. 3 world.
Well,
quality,
I think I agree with you. I feel like they seem to have this mentality of like they have like one big refresh every couple of years, as in like we had that one window a few seasons ago where we signed. Well, I say one window. We had the January and the summer, but we signed Van Dijk,
Alisson,
Fabinho, and Keita came in, and I feel like I'm missing someone as well. No, Matip, Fabinho, Fuse. But like you think that's like that's 3 quarters of a spine right there. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying.
And going on to that AFCON thing you said, what happens when that comes around? It's going to be Jota up there with Fabinho. It's like that's not an attack that threatens any team. No offence to those 2 guys, but just them 2 alone.
I mean, the thing is though, and I appreciate what you're saying in that there is the potential that it may have has it gone a bit stale. Which I think would be a fair argument. Equally, despite having to play, I would say at least 2/3 of a season with
they did get third.
Big Nat Phillips and Reece Williams as our 2 senior centre halves, and then Fabinho filling in at centre half. Thiago plays in midfield, but he plays the holding midfielder, which is not his best position. Henderson was injured for a significant amount. We had a lot of injuries. We still managed to finish 3rd, and Mane wasn't playing particularly well, and Jota got injured. So, I think I kind of agree with what you're saying, but equally, when you consider the fact that you've now got Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez coming back, then you add in Konate into the mix. I feel like in defence that's a big step up. With the greatest respect to Nat Phillips, he came in and did an absolute job. Like I'll be honest with you, if we sell Nat Phillips, I'd be really disappointed. But equally, sometimes you need that extra bit of quality. If you get, Salah seems to be Mr. Consistent, doesn't he? As in, he always seems to score goals. If you can get Mane firing and keep Jota fit, that's potentially a dangerous attack. So. It's a bit of a weird one with Liverpool. I'm not sure how I read it at the moment. But Dav, what are your thoughts looking... it's a bit more difficult for me to say because I can't really be impartial, I guess, as a Liverpool fan. But what are your thoughts on Liverpool's chances?
Yeah, I think it is an odd one that they haven't replaced Wijnaldum. I suppose, like, Klopp looks at his squad and thinks, bizarrely, like, if you are going to go with Fabinho, Thiago and Henderson... Bizarrely, he does actually have quite a few options. Like, he's got Milner, he's got Keita, he's got Curtis Jones, he's got Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. So he's got options. None of those players... I think Keita, it's fair to say, given out he cost 50-odd million pounds, has underperformed. And, like, this is kind of his season where if he's going to step up, he's going to have to step up. James Milner will always do a job, like Mr. Dependable, and Curtis Jones is a good attacking prospect, but you do wonder whether they are just one midfielder short there who can kind of be that engine room that Wijnaldum was. But I think when you think of these top 4 teams, teams at the top of the table, I think with all of them, like, I think I've got some respect really for the way that at United, Solskjaer and in the past like Ferguson, they weren't afraid to play the younger players. Like, I wonder how many Liverpool supporters, how many would say, I'd rather have Harry Wilson coming off the bench than Xherdan Shaqiri. Like, but we've sold Harry Wilson to Fulham for £12 million. Like, Harry Wilson has been there for a number of years. Like, I'm sure he would wanted to have proved himself. So you got players like Shea Ojo. He spent last season on loan at Cardiff. Harvey Elliott, he was on loan at Blackburn. You got talent, you got ability. So do you think, does Klopp just not rate those players? Does he not want to? Because obviously they did it with Trent, and he's done it with Nico Williams to a point. But up front, obviously, like Salah, Firmino, Mane have kind of got the grasp of the front three, and Jota is, in and amongst that. But come Christmas time, when they're going off to the African Cup of Nations, like, you're going to have somebody fill in, and unless he really has got confidence in Minamino to, he's had a season to settle in the Premier League, and now he's really going to go to the next level. Like, where is that coming from?
Yeah,
you have got to wonder. Like, you think, are they a player short? But look, having Van Dijk and Gomez back, it probably feels like a fresh signing, doesn't it, after last season? So I think that gives them a competitive edge for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point, really. And I think, in a weird way, having Gomez and Van Dijk back is almost as good as having an extra signing. But yeah, I would agree with you in that. I think ultimately, if you're talking in terms of Premier League, I think you're probably a couple of players short there, really. All it takes is a nasty injury to, say, Mo Salah, and all of a sudden you're looking at it and going, ooh, that's our main goal threat gone, and you're probably going to have to play either Minamino, who is fairly unproven, or Harvey Elliott, who is also very unproven and very young. So, yeah. I think Liverpool. I still think Liverpool are good for a top 4 spot, but I'd be a little bit suspicious of a title challenge, to be honest, from Liverpool this season. But we'll see. I mean, last season, I'm pretty sure I remember one of the very first podcasts we did, Jack, when Liverpool were at the start of their very bad run of form. And I said something along the lines of, Liverpool, they're never going to finish outside of the top 4. That'll never happen.
I did say for a long time that they were going to not do, and I was like, I might actually be right, yeah. It was a joke at first, but it quickly escalated.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that one. Perhaps if I say Liverpool aren't going to contend, they'll go on to win it. I like that logic. Go on.
Speaking of top 4, we've spoken of those 4 particular teams, but do you think there are any other sort of potential challenges? Because, I mean, I'm envisioning the way it's going, it's quickly returning to the days of old where there's 4 dominant teams and everybody else is trying to get a look in. I know Leicester for 2 seasons now they've probably spent more time in the top 4 than any team other than City for the last 2 seasons, but both times have capitulated in the last few weeks to end up outside. Do you envision them giving it another battle again for the top 4, or do you think the fact that they just haven't got the financial clout of these big teams to spend, to be fair, Liverpool haven't, but the other 3 in particular to have spent as much as they can, do you think they're going to be able to contend, or even any other team?
Yeah, I think Leicester will, because before last season, you might have thought, can they do it Thursday night and Sunday, Europa League and Premier League? But they proved they could, and they won an FA Cup in the process as well. So I think actually, they've got an excellent coach in Brendan Rodgers. They've got a club that's very well run. The FA Cup celebration showed us how much the owners and the chairman and all of that, it's a real unit there. And to be fair, every season they've had to sell a big player, haven't they? They've sold Chilwell, they sold Maguire, they sold Kante, Mahrez, yeah, exactly. Whereas this season, I know there's rumours about James Maddison, but they haven't sold anyone yet. And yeah, I think that they will be in and amongst it. I'm not saying they'll get top 4, but they play a nice style of football. They won the Community Shield on the weekend, so they've obviously, they've come back and hit the ground running. They're up for it this season, so I think they will challenge. Yeah, I think that last season proved that they have got enough depth to be able to compete on two fronts, which is good. I'm glad for Brendan Rodgers.
You just mentioned their style of play and the fact that they've got Brendan Rodgers. In the past we've sort of categorised managers in terms of some managers are title-winning managers, some managers are the sort of guys who can move you from mid-table to sort of European football. Some will get you from relegation up to the mid-table, and some are just relegation managers. Do you see Brendan Rodgers in that sort of top-tier bracket, the sort of manager that could win a team a league if he is at one of those top teams? I know he's had a stint at Liverpool before. Or do you think... Well, yeah, how do you rate him? Obviously, as a Swans fan, you would have seen quite a lot of Rodgers football in a sense. What are your opinions on Rodgers in particular?
I think he could win a league, yeah, definitely. Like, he was one slip away from it happening, wasn't he? And that slip probably cost him his job at Liverpool. And he went up to Celtic, dominated the domestic scene up there, and he's left, and actually Celtic have fallen away. So, shows how good a job he did. And he's obviously invested in the project at Leicester, isn't he? And he has taken them to the next level. They are competing at a particular level. And, there was rumours about Spurs and whatnot a couple of months ago. But can you blame him for not taking it on? Like, he's obviously got a system that's working for him at Leicester, and he doesn't need to move at the moment, does he? Like, and he could easily bide his time and wait until one of the big clubs possibly were to come along. But I think with the right circumstances, he could. I think it's a stretch to say he'd win it at Leicester. Not impossible. Obviously, they showed us that 5 years ago. But I think he's an excellent manager, and he's got self-belief and confidence. He knows the way he wants to play. And I think that it wouldn't be... He's performed... You look at his track record, he's won trophies. He is a winner. So I think that he's got a lot going for him. I really like him, and I'm sad that he ever left the Swans in the first place.
Oh. Kind words. Do you think like the sort of Chelsea, because obviously he's been at Chelsea as a kid, back up to Mourinho, second in command, or City even. Do you think one of those sort of teams, or do you think you could even see him back at the likes of Liverpool? I don't think he could to United, if I'm honest. They like flashy names, I think.
If City wanted to carry on with the style of football, Brendan Rodgers is very possession based, but
fair.
He's not a particularly flashy name to City either, is he? So
no, yeah.
I don't know if he would. Like, the story with Chelsea would be quite nice, because he was a youth coach. He knew a lot of the youth players there, and he was a backup with Mourinho there. But you wouldn't want to see him go there and be chewed up in a couple of years, like every manager isn't there? So I don't know. I'd be interested to see what happens. But I think wherever he goes, he's got. I don't think nobody can say that he's a bad manager. He's a bad coach. He's got too many trophies and too much in his record book to say that he's a bad coach. I really like him, and you look at what he's done. Because to be fair, Ranieri won the league at Leicester, but they didn't follow it up the following season, did they? But Leicester have been top 5 the last 3 years or something like that. I read recently. Like, they have been consistent, and that is because of Brendan Rodgers.
Fair enough. Well, sort of moving on to the sort of clubs which are championship level, like Swansea. The bottom. The new boys, sort of Brentford, Norwich, Watford, obviously. Well, I assume you've probably seen a lot more of them than myself and Jack, being that you are a fan of a club in the Championship. Do you envision any of those 3 clubs staying up this season?
I do. And maybe it's just the poetry of it, but I think on style of play and whatnot, I'd be tempted to go for Brentford.
Oh, really?
So I definitely think Watford will come back down. And then Norwich, it's all to do with how much, have they learned from last time, essentially, because their team isn't too dissimilar, but I wonder actually how much of a difference positively Billy Gilmour will make, because he seems like he's got a lot of potential, and they've lost Bundia to Aston Villa, and Skip, who was at them last season on loan from Spurs, he's not come back, so they needed someone in midfield, and they brought Billy Gilmour in. So I think Norwich have got an outside chance of staying up. I think Brentford, they're just like a kind of total football. I think there'll be a lot of people's second teams.
Really?
They're kind of underdog, but I think that they've got a chance. But yeah, I hope that they do, just to kind of prove a point to the Premier League, because last season we almost, like, Leeds did very well, obviously, but when you look at the three teams that went down last season, of Fulham, West Brom and Sheffield United, 2 went up, came straight back, and the other one was coming down in their second season, so it does show how tough it is to stay in the league.
We've said in the past that, particularly for relegation battling teams, the key does usually tend to be, have you got a striker that can score goals? I wouldn't say Norwich or Watford. Well, Watford have got, I think, 25% of all the strikers in the league at the moment, which is crazy. I don't know who's up front for Norwich, but Brentford have Ivan Toney, and lots been said about him. Do you think he's a good enough striker to keep Brentford in the league? Do you think it's going to be on him, or do you think it is going to be the total football that you speak of?
It could be on him, but to be fair, like last season, Ollie Watkins moved to Villa from Brentford, and he was quite unproven, but he had a decent season. So I think even Tony could do all right, actually. You do know who's up front for Norwich, in Timu Puki.
Of course.
It's just whether, because 2 years ago he took the first 10 games by storm, didn't he? And then he disappeared. So you just wonder whether he will be able to replicate that kind of, but keep it going and be more consistent. And I think that would be the key for Norwich. Have they learned from last time? Daniel Farker is still there. They've stuck with him. He's a manager who knows the club. He knows the team. He knows the way they play. So I think that it's possible that Tony will bear a lot of the brunt, but I think if he hadn't gone up this season, I think a team would have snapped him up anyway, because he was he set a new record for most goals scored in a championship season, so he's obviously got ability, and this is what it's about, isn't it? Stepping up on the bigger stage. And I know it's always a bit of a risk with the unknown players, how in a new league, how are they going to do, but I think that he's got a lot of talent, a lot going for him, and I think he'll do all right.
So you mentioned that Pookie was so good for the sort of opening 10 games last season. Do you think promoted teams do have to sort of depend on that opening series of games to get the ground running, and that's really what's going to shape their season in terms of how many points can they get early? And do you think the fact that Norwich start the season, Liverpool, Man City, Leicester, Arsenal, is going to massively dent their hopes of staying up?
It could. I mean, I think the key is don't panic, isn't it? You don't expect to get anything from those games. So I think they'll be looking more at performance, really, in those opening games. How are they performing, as opposed to, are they just getting swept aside? That'll be more of a concern. I think if they're being beaten narrowly, then okay, it's a disappointing result, but they're difficult fixtures to start, and it's not necessarily the end of the world, because everyone's got to play those teams at some point, and you could argue, well, we've got some of our harder fixtures out of the way early on. Fair. So it's not the end of the world, but it is true, like momentum-wise, you don't want to be left in the starting gate, do you? Like, that's what happened to Sheffield United last season. They just never got going, and the time they won their first game, it was like, no point in worrying, because you're already going down. Like, it was November or something ridiculous, wasn't it, when they won their first game? So, yeah, there's a fine line, obviously, in that, but just because they lost, if they were to lose their first 3 or 4 games, it's the manner of the defeat as opposed to the defeat itself that I think would be the main thing that the the Norwich fans would be concerned about, I'd have thought.
You seem pretty sound that Watford, of the three, are probably the most guaranteed to go down. But last year their defence was, tied the championship record for fewest goals conceded. From the point their new coach, Xisco Munoz, took over in December, they conceded only 3 goals in 13 home matches, claiming 11 clean sheets. Do you not think that they... Well, arguably, looking at the stats, I thought Watford were going to be your team to most likely stay up with those sort of numbers. Do you not think a team can stay up based on defence alone?
No, because Harry Kane don't play in the Championship. Like, that's the key difference for me. Like,
Fair.
You can have... If you've got someone who's good, who's got talent as a forward, then they'll be able to kind of cut it as the... To a point. They might not be scoring 20, 30 goals a season. I don't think Tony will score 30 goals a season like he did last year. But if he scores 15 or even 10, like that, getting to double figures, that can be enough to keep a team up. But defensively, like, it's such a step up to the Premier League. The pace is greater. I just think you can be a decent defender in the Championship, and you know it is where the real football happens. But the quality, there is a difference. There is definitely a difference in quality, undeniably. So you're not coming up against Cavani and his movement. You're not coming up against Kane and his one-touch finishing. You're not coming up against, Foden and Sterling and De Bruyne picking a pass. So you can have the best stats from the Championship, but you've got to take them with a pinch of salt going into the Premier League, because it's such a step up. And there's a little bit of me that just doesn't like the way that Watford go about there. They just seem to be like a carousel, don't they? Like, just
but it's working.
churning through managers. Yeah, it seems to work, but there's a bit of me that just doesn't like that particular approach to the way that they do things. But not that I have anything personal against Watford, but I just think that you can't. Their defence is not going to be as good in the Premier League, and I don't think you can. Well, I'd be really surprised if they continue that defensive form this going into the Prem, because it's such a step up.
Fair. Sort of shifting maybe some questions to Jack. I know obviously the Championship's what Dav's probably a specialist in, but sort of going more focusing on the Premier League teams. Are there any teams that you think could potentially be a threat this year, Jack?
Based purely on the fact that they've lost their striker up front, I'd say Southampton perhaps are a little bit in trouble. Having said that, Danny Ings was injured for part of last season, and Southampton seemed to do okay, so perhaps not. Excuse me, I think Palace are the one out of those bottom teams that I'd kind of look at and I'd ask questions, purely because they've, under Roy Hodgson, they've played a very defensive style of football, which that's how they've played, and he's managed to find stability with that for Palace. However, I feel like if you're going to bring in a coach, ultimately, I don't really know how good Vieira is as a coach. I was surprised when they hired him, to be honest. He didn't last in the MLS. The Premier League is a different level.
Different gravy.
Yeah, so perhaps I'm maybe a little bit unfairly sceptical because I haven't seen enough of him. But equally, the fact that I haven't heard a lot about him would possibly suggest that he hasn't been particularly brilliant as a manager. It just seems a little bit of a weird one for me from Palace.
Quick fire question.
So,
do you think Vieira will make it past the second international window with the opening to the season they have, which, for those who aren't aware, is Chelsea, followed by Brentford, followed by West Ham, followed by Spurs, followed by Liverpool, followed by Brighton, Leicester, Arsenal, Newcastle, Man City. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams, which arguably could all be battling for the probably top 8, 9 positions.
Does my answer have to be yes, no?
Yeah.
No.
No, you don't think you... Okay, fair enough. You think
I don't think so. I'll qualify what I was thinking in that I think in those games, if you can see a marked change in how Palace are going to play, I think they may keep him on.
Mm-hmm.
However, just from the point of view of, like, Roy Hodgson managed to bring stability to Palace when they were perhaps in a bit more of a turbulent period. So ultimately, you'd never expect Palace to go and beat Chelsea, Spurs, Liverpool, Leicester, City. You wouldn't expect them to go and beat them. However, if you're going to be poor defensively, the question is like, where are they going really? As in, either they've got to try and be as good defensively as they have been under Roy Hodgson, or they've got to move away from that style and perhaps try and be a bit more creative, try and get Wilfred Zaha in the game a bit more, so it's not just a case of like lumping it up to him or passing it out to him and hoping that he'll create something. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Would you perhaps throw Burnley into there, only because they were the 17th place team last year? They did have an 11-point gap to the next lowest team, which was relegated. But they've scored just 33 all season out of 38 games. Is that a worry, the fact that, to be honest, do you think Chris Wood's a good enough striker to keep a team in the league? Do you think they're in as bad a situation as a Southampton or a Palace?
I wouldn't say they're in quite as bad a situation as Palace, personally. I think, for me, Burnley nowadays are effectively what Stoke used to be. As in, not necessarily, not necessarily brilliant in front of goal. However, like, going to Turf Moor is a tricky fixture. Like, it's not an easy place to play. So I think from that perspective, possibly be okay. However, as we've just been discussing, ultimately in the Premier League, if you want to stay up, you have got to score some goals and you've got to win some games. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think on paper you'd probably argue not. However, they've managed to stay there so far, so we'll see.
Fair. I was going to sort of chuck Newcastle in there because Mike Ashley's their owner. That's probably the only reason I've got them in this conversation.
As per, they're always in the conversation.
To be fair, they've signed Scott Willock, who was probably their best player last year on loan from Arsenal for about 20 mil, which, to be fair, is a pretty shrewd bit of business by them. So they probably are going to be safe, but Mike Ashley can always do Mike Ashley things. Let's perhaps move up the table to the middle of the table. Any teams you think will drastically improve or decline from last season? That's sort of an open question to both.
I mean, this is probably going to give away one of my answers for some of the questions we've got later, but I fancy Everton are going to struggle under Benitez, to be honest. Just because I feel like if Ancelotti can't get those players to play, I don't really back Rafa to get them to play. to be honest, that's my thinking.
What about you, Dev? Any team in particular you think could come out the blocks? Well, maybe not in the blocks. See the end of the season in a unusually bad or good form.
I think that West Ham will struggle a little to keep up because of the Thursday-Sunday. Like, that will stretch them a bit. Even though...
And they've lost Lingard as well.
Yeah, Lingard really helped them to that sixth spot last season. So I think they'll be fine. They'll stay in the league, but they won't quite hit the heights of this season just because of the strain that will put on the squad. And I think what will be interesting to see is how the new signings that Villa have made, how they will gel together, because you could argue in the same way that Liverpool sold Coutinho, and at the time you thought he's surely one of our better players, but the money was used in such a way it made Liverpool a better team. If these signings that Villa have made, and they seem to be pretty shrewd signings, they seem to be informed and they make sense. They've spent good money, but not ridiculous money, but they've not been cheapskates either. If those can work and it makes Villa an all-round better team, like I know they scraped through season before last, but last season they were pretty solid, and I think they could build on this last season, and I think top 6 might just be beyond them, but who knows, the Europa Conference League might be calling.
Europa Conference. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Oh, man.
It would be interesting to see. I mean, I'm amazed they managed to sign Danny Ings first off. Why Southampton
great signing.
That's a big help, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a cracking signing, I think.
Yeah.
Really good signing.
They look like a stronger team without Grealish than with... Not obviously if they had Grealish, they'd be even stronger. But from the season team that ended last season, they do look remarkably better.
Well, and I guess the thing is in like when you look at, they had that period, didn't they, where Grealish was injured. That's the drawback. Yes, Jack Grealish is a fantastic player, but ultimately he's only one man, isn't he? So it's like you said, Dav. Sometimes Liverpool did it, as in sometimes you have got to cash in on that one player, and ultimately it makes your whole squad better. As in, like, who would have thought that? Like, I remember when Leon Bailey was being linked to, the teams. Yeah, well, top teams at the top end of the league, and Aston Villa have managed to bag him for around £30 million. Well, that's a brilliant bit of business. So, yeah, I think Villa could be a bit of a dark horse, sort of bolt out of the blue, kind of top half of the table. We'll see, though. We'll see.
Should we go on to some pre-season predictions then?
Sure, why not?
Winner. Who's winning the league this year?
Dav, do you have a winner in mind?
Yeah, Man City.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'd also back City, to be honest.
They've
got too much depth.
I'm going outside, very much like I did for the Champions League and the Euros, and managed to pick correctly both times. I'm going Chelsea. I think if they sign Lukaku, they become the hardest team to beat. That's my opinion. Yeah,
to be fair, I mean, I feel like when I wrote these, it was less certain that Lukaku was coming, but yeah.
Top 4 then?
I think, yeah.
What are your other 3 then? Are you all convinced it's going to be a Liverpool United Chelsea combo firstly?
Yes.
Yeah, I would be as well.
And in what order?
It's a tricky one, to be honest. I mean, the order that I've put down, I've put Liverpool, United, Chelsea. And my justification was for Liverpool being second. Ultimately, we finished third last season. And this season, we've got Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez fit, with Konate signed. We've also got Jota back, who started off the season very well. So if you're looking at it on paper, you'd argue that realistically Liverpool can only get better from where they were last season. They finished third. So, however,
it's a marathon.
Chelsea, yeah, and I've put United third, Chelsea fourth. I think it could be really tight. I'll be honest with you. I think it's going to be really tight. Realistically, I think you could probably have those 3 teams in any which order you want right now, and you could justify it in any way. That's my thinking.
Fair. What about you, Dav?
Well, I'm hoping that after the last couple of seasons where we've had one team run away with it, for that particular team, their supporters have loved it, but for the rest of us, we've kind of thought, oh, right, well, no point the last, what was it, 7-8 games with Liverpool, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I'd like to think that these 4 teams will kind of match each other and go toe to toe for pretty much. It would be great going into the last 8-10 games with all 4 of them still right in the mix. I think that would be good for the league. And I agree with Jack. You really could have them any kind of order, really. I just wonder whether, if you had to push me, I would possibly go Chelsea, then Liverpool, then United. And I put that purely down to managerial experience.
Fair.
Because there's still that element that's hanging over Solskjaer, that until he wins something and proves that you can. Cause don't get me. The thing being, like, we could go and coach a team with Jadon Sancho in it, and we probably wouldn't get the best out of him. And I think that's maybe doing a slight disservice to Solskjaer because he's got his badges and we haven't. But generally speaking, like, you've got to have a manager who can get the best out of their team, and we know Klopp can do that. We know Pep can do that. We know Tuchel can do that. But can Solskjaer do that? Maybe he can. Maybe this will be the season he does that. But until we see him show us something of that, I think I'd put United in fourth.
That's interesting, because Jack's sort of gone for the quality of the team. You've gone sort of the quality of the manager. I'm going to go for the depth of the team. I think it'll be City, United, Liverpool purely on depth. I think I've only put Liverpool. To be honest, I think Liverpool are a better team than United. But I think if Robertson's already injured, I know if he's walking on it, it's probably a better sign than what was initial. But the fact that they haven't replaced Wijnaldum, and I mean, I know they've come back from the injuries, but you never know how players come back and whether there's going to be a lingering injury. But I do worry about Liverpool's depth to challenge into that upper tier, maybe the top one or two. So yeah, I've gone City, United, Liverpool. Which three teams do you think are going to get relegated? It's sort of open.
I'll go on top. You go.
I know what you guys are going to say. So I think that Watford will go down, as I've already alluded to. Mm-hmm. I think that Norwich will go down as well. And to be a little bit different, I think that this is a very nervous season for Burnley fans. Because, and having just said everything I've said about managers, Sean Dyche knows how to keep a team in the Premier League. Yeah. So, but they haven't got someone who can score a lot of goals, and their squad is thin. So, I don't fully believe myself that Burnley will go down, just because of Sean Dyche. But
yeah,
it's a nervous. Like they've not. Like they had.
They're a candidate, aren't they?
They had the season they had last season, which was nervy right up until the last 4 games to go, and they haven't done anything about it. Like I think that's the nervous thing for Burnley fans. So I think I'll say that just to be different and be proved wrong when Burnley get into Europe.
Fair enough. I've gone for, and this is in no particular order, by the way, I've gone for Norwich because they're up and down like a yo-yo. Palace because I don't understand the managerial decision with Vieira, and Watford just because I think, well, for the reasons that Dav said earlier, really, is in, yes, they've been good defensively in the Championship, but as in, like, for me, you look at look at when Cardiff were in the Premier League, as in defensively you would have had them as a good team, but sometimes you've got to get to a point where you play football and not just defend. And I think for me, Watford look like one of those teams that, yes, they'll get perhaps a 0-0 draw with maybe a team that's above them, but I feel like the majority of the games that defence isn't going to get them through. So yeah, I think it'll be those 3 teams going down.
Fair enough. I'm going to go against what I say about relegation candidate teams needing a striker. I think Watford are actually going to stay up. I've gone for Palace, Norwich and Brentford. No particular order. But yeah, I agree with the Palace one. I think they're going to get off to a rotten start and I don't think they'll ever get going. Norwich, I just don't think. I mean, we saw them before. They were just non-starters, really. And Brentford, I feel like Brentford are here for the journey. They'll go down, and I think they'll come back up and do it properly. But I just think it's going to be a weird season for them. Especially first time in so long, new stadium. I think it's just going to be a foreign atmosphere for them, being up there. But yeah, that's my relegation 3. Surprise of the season. There could be an individual, it can be the team. I've gone for Brighton to challenge for Europe. I think.
Can I change mine?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to stick with my Brighton thing, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Well, I was more just going to say, if they sign a striker for sure, I think they can challenge for Europe, but maybe a Tammy Abraham. But yeah, I think the stats show that they're a very good defensive team and they make a lot of chances, and I think all they need is a striker to have a bit of a purple patch and they could be in amongst that UEFA Conference conversation. Yours?
The one that I'm going to say now, initially I had Everton to be in a relegation fight. However, having discussed about Villa, I think there's the potential that they could be challenging for Europe.
At what stage? Champions League?
What?
Conference?
I mean, I feel like Champions League would be a bit of a stretch, but I think Europa League, definitely.
Fair enough.
With the players they've signed and the team they already had. Yeah.
What about you, Dav? Any surprise of the season you're anticipating?
I think I'll go a player and I'll go a team. I think that as a team, that I think that Southampton are gonna, like, we forget that they were top like just before Christmas last season, and then they fell away, and I think they'll probably keep on falling away, and they'll be in a proper relegation tussle. So maybe you could argue how much of a surprise is that, I guess, because they're not a big team, but still, they're not necessarily inspired by them and what they have to offer. And then as a player, I think this could be the season where we see the slow phasing out of Jamie Vardy.
Oh.
Even though I'm not
big shout.
I'm not saying that he's not gonna play. I'm not saying that he's not gonna still have a part to play in the Leicester team and all of that kind of thing. But there's been a lot of big things said about Patson Daka coming in from Salzburg for £23 million, which these days that's not a lot of money, is it? So
no.
I think that he'll be a guy to watch. He played with Haaland when he was at Salzburg, and who's to say that on another day, because he could be the next Mane. Mane played for them as well, didn't he? So as a player to look out for, let's pick Patson.
Fair enough. First manager to get the sack?
Vieira. Sorry, it's as simple as that for me.
This has been a Patrick Vieira bashing session, hasn't it?
It has.
Poor
but,
Pat.
That's Palace's fault for hiring him.
Yeah. Silly Palace.
No. You watch him get top 10 now.
Yeah.
Oh,
he's going to win them all.
I wouldn't be surprised. Now that I've been so vocal against him, I would not be surprised,
I've gone for Daniel Farke. I just don't fancy Norwich. I think they got an awful start, and I think if they carry that starting form and don't win that game against Watford, which is game number 5, they then have Everton, Burnley, Brighton, Chelsea, Leeds, and I think that the Watford loss could, if they lose to Watford in game 5, I think they really could be in trouble, and I wouldn't be surprised if they give up on him. But I will just chuck in there, I think Thomas Tuchel, just following on from Di Matteo when he won the Champions League, if he does, Chelsea do not have a nice start to the season. It's Palace, then it's Arsenal, Liverpool, Villa, Tottenham, Man City, and I think you know what Abramovich is like. If they get off to a rotten start, he could be out the door really quickly. Just for
pressure
no reason.
is on.
What about yourself, Dav?
Oh, it's easy one for me. This one is Zizko Munoz, because that's what Watford do.
Oh, that's probably
fair enough. It's a good shout.
Yeah, it's a really good. I didn't even think about Watford just generally being Watford.
Yeah, they could be 5th and they'll still sack him
after 2 losses. Just like, that's enough. We've seen the last 5 tallies for winning teams. Last year it was 86 points. Then before that, 99. The year before that, 98. The year before that, 100. The year before that, 93. Do you think the winning team this year is going to have more or less points than 93? I've put 93 as sort of a benchmark. What do you think?
Lower, because it'll be more competitive.
Dav?
Took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, I think it'll be lower.
Wow. I'll be honest, I also think it's going to be lower. Yeah, I think 86 last year. I mean, you consider City went on like a 20-game winning streak, and that got them to 86. I think, yeah, I agree. I mean, who knows? It could be even low 80s. We could see a lowest point score tally ever. But yeah, cool.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? There we are. On that note, I believe that brings us to the end of this podcast.
That it does.
That it does. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, why not give us a like? Subscribe, follow, as per the platform you're listening on. As always, we're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Anchor. I think I've got them all.
Yeah.
Dav, pleasure as always. Thanks very much for joining us again.
Thank you, gents. Anytime.
Good stuff, good stuff. Jack, pleasure as always.
Congrats.
And we shall speak to you all soon.